Galw'r aelodau I drefn. Yr eitem gyntaf yn agenda ni'r prynawn yma yw'r cwestiynau'r prif weinidog a'r cwestiwn cyntaf Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. What is the Welsh Government doing to ensure that workers get paid the real living wage?
Well, we were accredited as a living wage employer in 2015. The Welsh NHS has paid the living wage since January 2015, and strong progress is being made across other employers, both in the public and in the private sector.
That sounds great, First Minister, but workers at Cardiff Airport would appreciate deeds rather than warm words. You bought this airport in 2013, yet we still have workers, some of whom live in the Rhondda, are being paid less than this living wage. An agreement with the GMB will see the airport, and I quote, working towards being in a position to implement the foundation living wage by the end of 2020. If that does happen, then it will have been a full 7 years on what has been called publicly funded poverty pay. Many of these employees are security staff performing vital functions that keep airport security in place and keep passengers safe. What pressure can you now exert to ensure that this asset becomes a Living Wage Foundation accredited employer by the next Living Wage Week in November?
Well, the airport has made a firm commitment to working towards achievement of the real living wage. A proposal has now been submitted to both recognised unions, the GMB and Unite, that the real living wage will be paid as a minimum to all directly employed airport staff by April 2020. Now, the unions will be taking this proposal to ballot, and we understand the unions will be making a positive recommendation to members. Now, that uplift is proposed to take place in 2 increments, the first in April 2019 and the second in April 2020. And that builds on the progress already made at the airport, which includes the eradication of zero-hours contracts and the introduction of enhanced rates of pay for both overtime and bank holiday working.
Jane Hutt.
As a member of the Real Living Wage Leadership Group, I was pleased to hear from the accreditation body Canal Cymru that 143 employers have been accredited in Wales, including private as well as public and third sector employers. Would you agree, First Minister, that we need to embed commitment and progress towards the real living wage in the Economic Action Plan and indeed the gender review, as it's clear this will help address low pay and inequality in the workplace in Wales?
Well, we are firmly committed to addressing low pay and inequality in the workplace in Wales. You're right, of course, to say that low pay impacts disproportionately on women, and our gender review will pick this up. In terms of the Economic Action Plan, it will introduce a new economic contract that will require firms seeking Welsh Government business support to commit to investing in their workforce through high-quality employment, skills development and fair work.
Nick Ramsey.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, 20 years ago, Welsh and Scottish workers had identical pay packets, about £301 per week. 20 years later, a Welsh pay packet contains £498 a week, whereas the Scottish pay packet contains £49 more at £547. Despite the important contribution of the living wage and the benefit system, I'm sure you'd agree that we do need to ensure fairness, particularly for those on lower incomes. What's your government doing to close this gap and ensure that there are higher paid, better quality jobs for people living in Wales? And what discussions have you had with the UK government with regard to the Taylor Review on modern working practices?
For one of the issues of the UK government is the mess they're making of the benefit system, particularly with regard to universal credit, which will affect disproportionately and very negatively so many people in Wales. We've seen the removal of in-work tax credits as well. That hasn't helped people in terms of their incomes. We've seen, for example, a refusal of the UK government to fund Wales properly, and indeed the UK government have given Northern Ireland £1 billion, whereas Wales has had absolutely nothing. There's a great deal of work I think the member can do with his own party in terms of making sure that Wales gets fairness, because we don't get it from the Tories.
David Rowlands.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, one of the fundamentals of economics is the law of supply and demand. If supply exceeds demand, the price of a commodity falls. This applies as much to the supply of labour as any other commodity. Would the First Minister not agree with me that it is the oversupply of cheap labour, especially in the semi-skilled and unskilled marketplace, caused by uncontrolled mass immigration, which has allowed big business to exploit workers with low wages?
There are many sectors of the Welsh economy who depend very much on labour from outside the UK. If we look at the food and drink sector, there are many firms who would simply not be able to survive because there are other options available. for local workers that are seen as more attractive. Our abattoirs, for example, would struggle hugely if they weren't able to recruit from other countries. So no, I don't agree that it's a question of oversupply. If you look at unemployment in Wales, it's historically very, very low, 4.5%. That's effectively full employment in terms of economics, which is why, of course, there's a need to be able to recruit skilled workers and workers who are semi-skilled from other countries. Where would our NHS be, for example, without the doctors that we recruit from outside Wales? I prefer to have a situation where people have the treatment they need rather than obsessing with where they're from.
Question 2, Lee Waters.
Llywydd, will the First Minister commit to a review of how digitisation can support the better delivery of public services?
Yes, can I commend the member, first of all, for his interest in this? I know he has a very deep interest in digitisation and the opportunities that it affords, not just the threats that are sometimes perceived as being there. We are reviewing progress in the use of digital and data in public service delivery to ensure we are maximising the potential for digital to contribute to our approach to public service delivery in Wales.
Thank you very much. It takes 55 days to start the recruitment of a nurse after they've handed their notice in, and we're spending some £59 million on agency nurses. NHS Shared Services estimate that using existing technologies, they can take 30 days off that time, saving some 13 million. There are opportunities like this right across public services to free up resource to deliver frontline services. The Welsh Government has announced a review of automation and digital, and I recently met with Professor Phil Brown, who's leading that. And I must say we're very fortunate to be having him leading that work and the expert panel that's been put together. I think it's a very exciting piece of work. But it's a piece of work that looks primarily at skills and at labour force issues, not at the whole raft of issues right across the public sector, both to use artificial intelligence, but crucially existing technologies we have available now that are not being harnessed. So would the First Minister look into the whole piece and not just the labour market dimensions?
No, I agree, and it's an issue I know the members raised with me privately. How do we look at digitisation as a way of improving public service performance? He's given an example there, which he's given to me before, and it's hugely important that the recruitment process is speeded up. The question is then, how do we do it? Well, there are a number of recent or current reviews which cover aspects of digitisation. The Parliamentary Review on Health looked at it, for example, in the field of health, the Reid Review in terms of innovation, and the Bowen Review in terms of the workforce. Now, within health, Informed Health and Care sets out the vision for the delivery of digital services to support health and social care services and policies. The Parliamentary Review made a specific recommendation on digital services which will be taken up within the Transformation Plan, which is part of a paper that will be considered by Cabinet. And of course we have in Julie James a Cabinet Secretary who is taking forward the digitisation agenda. What I want to avoid is for digitisation to be taken forward in different compartments rather than taken forward as an opportunity across government.
Janet Finch-Saunders.
Diolch Llywydd. Of course, First Minister, access to the internet and indeed good broadband speeds are now considered as one of the main utilities that a family or a household should have. However, the latest communications market report for Wales found that just over 8 households out of 10 actually can access the internet. 83%. So that leaves 17% of people who cannot access the internet. Now, when they cannot access the internet for services that are only available online, then they are at a great disadvantage. Now, at present, for example, also, to register as a landlord under Rent Smart Wales costs £33.50 if you complete the application form online, but £80.50 for a paper-based application. And in Aberconway, a number of my constituents have actually had to pay this extra money and found it quite an unfair system. Will you commit to reviewing processes across all Welsh Government public service providers to ensure that such discrepancies and indeed these natural barriers are removed?
I think I have to say to the member that I think the information she's using is out of date, possibly a year out of date.
Well, the Cabinet
that is my
not
understanding. And we look at Superfast Cymru, for example, and what we have done with that. That has meant that a substantial number, nearly, not 100%, but more than 90% of premises in Wales have access to superfast broadband. That would not have been done without Welsh Government intervention. If this had been left to the market, many of her constituents would have been left without broadband forever and a day. So the intervention that we have put in place as a government has ensured that many people will have access to broadband, otherwise they would not have. There will be a small percentage of the population who will need to look at other solutions in terms of accessing a broadband speed that people would find acceptable. But we're proud of our record in rolling out broadband across rural communities in Wales that would otherwise have no access at all.
Cwestiwn yn nawr gan arweinwyr pleidiau ac arweinydd yr wrthblaid Andrew Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, today the Public Accounts Committee have brought forward their report looking at the expenditure around the Circuit of Wales. And just before I ask you the question, I'm sure you join me in congratulating the Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, who announced that him and his wife are expecting their first child in a few months' time. But when you look at this report, it really does make for depressing reading, to say the least. It doesn't look at the policy position, in fairness, because that's not the public accounts role. It looks at the expenditure of money, and it indicates lack of ministerial oversight on many of the decisions that were taken, press releases that were put out that were in contrary to the evidence that the committee then uncovered that showed that the department was aware of what was going on with this money. You are head of the government. How on earth can a government department operate in such circumstances as the report identifies today, which basically indicates that the department was being run by the officials rather than the Minister?
Well, first of all, could I join him in his congratulations to Nick Ramsey? I found out about his good news on Facebook. So that is something that certainly all of us on these benches would offer him congratulations on, of course, him and his wife. In terms of the issue that's raised by the Leader of the Opposition, there are questions that we will need to address in the response to the committee's report. But of course, as the committee has reported, it's absolutely right that there should be a full response at the right time.
And I fully accept that, First Minister, but I noticed the government response to date, which didn't seek to refute the allegations that the officials were running this department at the time. And that's a very serious accusation based on the evidence that the committee have put together. It's a cross-party committee. It was a unanimous report, and it was indicating as well that some of these oversights were happening into this current administration as well, as recently as 27th of April last year, when the current Cabinet Secretary was in place. It refers to the press releases that were put out and the government's written statement. It is deeply troubling for many people who look in on this, and you'll be aware of this through your constituency work and all the other members, when you go to organisations that say the Welsh Government demand paper A, paper B, due diligence reports so that they can get a very small grant of maybe a couple of £1,000. Here we're talking millions of pounds and hundreds of thousands of pounds on specific projects. And I put it to you again, what I'm trying to elicit from you is, as head of the government, how on earth can the officials run the department without the Minister having oversight of these decisions? That's a very serious accusation that needs an answer. And surely today, you, as head of the government, can give us that answer and that reassurance that the changes in place will not allow this situation to happen again.
Well, the Leader of the Opposition will be aware of the Cartona principle and the way that operates. But it wouldn't be right for me to prejudge a full response. I mean, this is a serious report that deserves a serious response, and that has to be done at the right time. At that time, of course, it's absolutely right that members should have the opportunity to scrutinise what government has done and the response that government puts in place.
It doesn't look as if I'm going to get an answer. I appreciate that, but I look forward to the answer when it comes. But will you give us an assurance then this afternoon, First Minister, that if the government acknowledges these accusations, these assertions, based on the evidence that the committee took, the cross-party committee that looked into this, that to date no one has, from what I can understand, been disciplined or been sanctioned because of the very serious allegations that have been substantiated in this report. Will you therefore commit to a government response that indicates that sanctions have been taken where they need to be taken? Because, as I said, it cannot be right that people can have such leadership in a department that aren't elected members, the ministers or the cabinet secretaries, and the officials are running those departments. This department clearly seemed to be out of control, First Minister.
Well, first of all, there are a number of issues that the committee raises that we have to consider, but we are entitled to put forward a response as a government, of course, and at that time, members will want to weigh up, of course, what the committee has said and the important points the committee has raised, together with the government response. And that's, to my mind, the proper way of doing things. It's at that time, of course, that there will be scrutiny of government decisions. But I don't think it's right to prejudge any response that we might put in place. But it is obviously a report that we must look at very, very seriously, because there are issues there that we will need to address as government, but they will be addressed when the full response is produced.
Rwy'n Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. A third of Welsh children live in poverty. Does the First Minister believe his government or the Conservatives in Westminster are best placed to tackle this national crisis?
In terms of being best placed to tackle it, there's no doubt the UK government has a very strong role through the welfare system, through the way it can look at tax credits, but it has unfortunately walked away from the role that government should have, which is firstly to reduce inequality in society, and secondly to ensure that money goes where money is needed most around the UK, and that is something that they have not taken forward over the last 8 years.
First Minister, you are the Government of Wales and you can take responsibility. You can lift people out of poverty, yet you are choosing not to. Your ministers claim that the devolution of welfare administration would undermine the social union of the UK. Now, putting aside the fact that every other government in the UK has power to administer welfare, does he think this reckless undermining of the social union has driven calls for the devolution of welfare from the Institute of Public Policy Research, Shelter Cymru, the Assembly's Cross-Party Equalities Committee, the Bevan Foundation, the Trussell Trust, the Scottish Labour Party, the Scottish Liberal Democrat Party, the UK Labour Party, the Labour Mayor of Manchester, and there are many more. Do you think all of these are divisive nationalists seeking to undermine the social union?
Well, I have to say, I find it extraordinary to be accused as a progressive politician, and all of us on these benches, that we are choosing not to address child poverty. That is a profoundly unfair allegation to make, but that's the allegation that she has made. I have to say, the suggestion that this is entirely within the hands of Welsh Government is simply fallacious. We know the UK Government has substantial levers in terms of welfare, in terms of the benefit system, in terms of employment law, in terms of the setting of the real living wage. Yes, we can do it in terms of the reach that we have to the public sector and to the third sector to an extent, but not to the private sector. What she is doing is absolving the UK Government of its responsibility, and that's where responsibility must lie. Now, it's one thing to say, let's administer benefits, but there are two problems with that. First of all, the Scots are spending money on bureaucracy. On bureaucracy. They are actually spending money on administration, which could be going to recipients. That is clearly an issue that we've had to consider. And secondly, administering the benefit system is no good if you can't control the flow of money. You just get the blame in those circumstances. People will then say, well, you're the ones administering the benefit system. Why don't you put more money into it? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? When actually you can't. So I've always been very, very reluctant to take on board the administration of something when I think it's a trap set by the UK Government.
So these levers exist, yet you don't want to have control over them. You talk of strategies and you bemoan the Tories' welfare policies, while your only real action is to cut the benefits under the responsibility of your own government. School uniform grant, cut. Independent living grant, cut. The education improvement grant, cut. Communities first, cut. A third of Welsh children are living in poverty. Thousands rely on food banks for a decent meal, and this is the best that you can do. First Minister, I've got a simple question. Are you willing to take responsibility, or are you happy to just carry on blaming the Tories in Westminster?
Let's look at this very carefully. The leader of Plaid Cymru represents a party that wants to see an independent Wales.
I knew that was coming.
And that, well, I know it's the case. And the reality is that we are recipients of transfers of money through the benefit system because of our membership of the UK. If she wants to make the case to the people of Wales, we should be independent and therefore have less money than we do now, less money to pay benefits, less money to support jobs, less money for the health service, less money for education. Let her make the case. That's what a party exists for. For me, I am a devolutionist. I believe the people of Wales deserve a strong voice, but we also have to make sure we are part of the social union of the UK that provides so many benefits to so many of our people. And what will make it even better is the election of a Labour government in Westminster.
Arweinydd grŵp UKIP, Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, last week the Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales was appointed to the National Criminal Justice Board and has vowed to fight to have policing devolved to Wales, saying that the time was right and that the policy was supported by all police and crime commissioners in Wales. So do you support this stance taken by your two police and crime commissioners? And what sort of timescale would you envisage to have policing devolved to Wales? And do the actions of Labour's PCCs undermine your Commission on Justice for Wales?
First of all, could I welcome her to her new role as leader of UKIP?
Thank you.
It is true to say that all 4 police and crime commissioners, both Labour and Plaid Cymru, are in favour of the devolution of policing. And that is something that I have supported for many, many years. Of course, this will form an important part of what the Thomas Commission has to look at. I believe it's always been the case that it makes little sense for policing not to be devolved, and every other emergency service is. And, well, this comes as news to Plaid Cymru. They should read the news of the past few years, shouldn't they? They will then find out. But it is the case.
Allow the First Minister to answer the question, please.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? We get accused of shouting, and we get that from the chamber. There we are. I don't mind a bit of life in the chamber. That's something that adds to its character. But it is. The answer is yes. I do support the devolution of policing, and I know all 4 police and crime commissioners do.
Thank you for your answer, First Minister. Since the creation, the Police and Crime Commissioner's budget has skyrocketed. The Labour PCC for South Wales indeed has a budget of 1.3 million and 28 staff plus a Deputy Commissioner. So this has meant an increase of 40% in the budget and double the amount of staff. Yet, in the last 3 years, there has been a 33% increase in violent crime in South Wales Police Force. So, should you get your wish and policing is devolved, will the Welsh Government abolish the role of police and crime commissioners, which divert resources away from frontline policing?
Well, it's right to say that if policing was devolved, it would be a matter then for this place to decide whether or not to keep police and crime commissioners. That is a judgment that would have to be taken when, rather than if, I trust policing is devolved.
Thank you. The role of the Police and Crime Commissioner was meant to bring local accountability to the police service. However, the majority of the Welsh public appear to be disengaged at the polling booths, and the figures are barely in double figures when people vote for Police and Crime Commissioners. So there are elections in less than 2 years. So what can be done to increase participation and engagement with PCCs in Wales? And do you think that the role should be overhauled to remove sort of party politics and giving more of a voice to community leaders rather than politicians?
Well, these are matters for the UK government, given the fact that PCCs are
they
not
will be, but if it was devolved.
So it's a matter for them to examine how best to increase turnout for police and crime commissioners and the elections that are held for those positions. But my position is very clear. I think it should be for this Assembly, Parliament, as it soon will be, I trust, to take the decision as to what sort of structure should exist in terms of the oversight of the police.
Question 3, Vicky Howells.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister set out the Welsh Government's key objectives for improving rail services in South Wales?
Yes, our future objectives and priorities for rail across Wales and the borders are outlined in the Rail Services for the Future document that was published last year.
Thank you, First Minister. You may be aware that in response to my campaign, Arriva Trains Wales have announced an extra 4 Sunday train services from Aberdeen, with the first service that now reaches Cardiff before 10 a.m. This is great news for commuters from the Cynon Valley. What assurances can the Welsh Government give that these services will be carried forward and included in any future timetabling under the new franchise?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate the member for what she has done. I know in the press release that was sent out on the 24th of April, Arriva Trains acknowledged the work that she had done to get the services running on a Sunday. Well, there will be an announcement tomorrow, of course, on the rail franchise, but as part of the work that's been put into that, we would want to see enhanced Sunday services.
Paul Davies.
Diolch. Prif Weinidog, dwi'n siŵr mae un o amcanion allweddol Llywodraeth Cymru i'w chraddio'r is-adeilydd presennol mwyn gwella profiad teithwyr. Mae'n holl bwysig bod pob rhan o Gymru yn teimlo'n manteision unrhyw fuddsoddiad gan Llywodraeth Cymru. Ers i chi fod yn Prif Weinidog, dwi wedi codi achos gorsaf trenau Aberdegleddau gyda chi sydd angen gwelliannau mawr. Yn anffodus, unwaith eto, dyw'r orsaf yma ddim ar rhestr gwelliannau'r Llywodraeth. Nawr, dwi'n deall fod yna graiteria penodol yn cael ei ddefnyddio i benderfynu pa o'r safoedd sydd yn derbyn buddsoddiad. Ond mae yna bryderon fod y criteria yma ddim yn briodol i ystyried fod gorsafoedd fel Aberdegleddau yn cael ei gadael ar ôl. Yn yr ymgylchiadau, ydych chi felly fel Llywodraeth yn bodlon edrych ar y criteria yma i sicrhau fod pob rhan o Gymru yn derbyn y buddsoddiad mae'n tynnu heiddi?
Wel, mae yna enghreifftiau lle mae gorsafoedd wedi cael buddsoddiad cyfalaf mewn llefydd gwledig a threfol. Dwi ddim yn ymwybodol unrhyw beth sydd yn osgoi gorsaf chwlffordd rhag gael buddsoddiad. Felly, os allai yr aelod i sgrifennu eto fi, allai ystyried y peth i weld os oes yna rhywbeth sy'n gallu cael ei wneud mwyn symud y chwlffordd lan yr rhestr. Aberdegleddau, fi'n flin, lan yr rhestr.
Adam Price.
Prif Weinidog, mae yna lot o gynsyrn yn ardal Castell Nedd ynglyn â'r syniad posib i eithrio gorsaf Castell Nedd o'r prif lein y reilffordd wrth adeiladu lein newydd. Mae'r Pwyllgor Daisebu wedi cadarnhau i fi mewn e-bost. Mae'r reswm mae Daeseb ynglyn â'r syniad yma wedi cael ei arfarnu'n ddilys yw taw Llywodraeth Cymru sydd wedi comisiynu gwaith cychwynnol, gwaith sgopio ar y syniad yma. Ydy'r Pwyllgor Daisebu yn gywir yn hynny beth?
O beth yw i gallu gweld, dath hwn o rhywbeth gath i wei gan un unigolyn, o ddim a cysylltiad gyda'r Llywodraeth, nid yn aelod o'r Llywodraeth, nid yn rhywun yn gweithio efo gwas sifil i'r Llywodraeth, fe weles i yn y Siambr hyn wrthos diwetha. Mae Castell Nedd yn orsaf bwysig dros ben a does yna unrhyw fath o bygythiad i wasanaethau yng Nghastell Nedd.
Griffiths.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, you will be aware of the great deal of frustration at the lack of progress in establishing a new Port to Ebervale passenger rail link train service. That's been the case for quite some time, and there's a great deal of concern in the area. Given the long-standing economic, social and cultural links between Newport and Ebervale, do you understand those concerns, and is there anything you can say today that would give comfort to those with these concerns?
Well, our aspiration remains to have 2 trains an hour operating along the Ebervale line from 2021. We want to see trains going into Newport, but it's a matter for Network Rail, an organisation that we can't even direct. And that's part of the problem that we have with the current settlement. The Scots can do it, we can't. That said, we want to work to make sure that the service is introduced in the near future, and to work with Network Rail to identify the technical solution that's needed in order for that to happen.
Question 4, Mark Isherwood.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the provision of orthopaedic surgery?
Yes, orthopaedic surgery is provided at each health board across Wales, and we expect all patients to be seen as quickly as possible and in accordance with Welsh waiting times standards.
A few weeks ago, I was contacted by a constituent who had seen a news report on TV the night before of waiting times as much as 18 months for hip operations, but she noted that this didn't mention knee operations, having been informed that she wouldn't get an appointment for 2 years minimum, but if she wanted or could afford to go private, she could have it done within 6 weeks at a cost of £11,000. How do you respond, therefore, to her statement to me? And what will you tell her regarding this statement? It seems so unfair that I have to suffer constant pain, loss of sleep and a great deal of trouble just because I can't afford to pay over £11,000 for my first operation. She's a 75-year-old lady.
Well, obviously, she is in a great deal of pain, and of course, that is something that nobody would welcome. It's very difficult to give an opinion on an individual's case without knowing more about it. If the member wants to write to me, then, of course, I will look at it. Generally, if we look at Betsy Cadwaladr, well, BCU received £11 million out of the performance money specified for referral to treatment times last year. What we have seen that the March 2018 position was 39% lower than the original profile. We've seen, for example, a reduction since October 2017 of people waiting for more than 38 weeks. And I can say that BCU are developing an orthopaedic plan for the region, looking at models of care and service redesign. That's been to their board on several occasions, I understand, and officials are discussing that proposal with BCU.
Rhina Piorwerth. Gantanev.
First Minister, make a statement on the public health implications of problem gambling.
Well, problem gambling has the potential to harm not just individual gamblers, but also family, friends and society as a whole. I mean, as we will all know, hardships can include financial hardship, psychological distress and the breakdown of personal relationships. And we do support a range of measures to address this, including support, advocacy, information and appropriate regulation.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. And like I think everyone here across parties, we welcome the announcement by the UK Government the other week of the intention to reduce the maximum bet for fixed odd betting terminals to £2, something that we've discussed in this chamber on a cross-party basis for almost five years. Of course, we need to see legislation, we need a timetable to make sure that this thing actually happens. And I wonder if you've given some thought to the issue as to whether this has implications with respect to the Government of Wales Act 2017 with regard to our devolved responsibility, whether an LCM will be required, whether there is an opportunity through an order in council for the devolution of gambling properly, because in terms of dealing with the health implications, we know the significant issue with regard to young gamblers, 11 to 15-year-olds. We have powers already in respect of education and planning, and that what we really need is to develop a strategy to deal with the growing problem recognised by the Chief Medical Officer for Wales of problem gambling, online gambling, using the powers that we've got at the moment, but also the opportunity to get proper devolution of full gambling responsibilities so that we can actually have all the tools to tackle this emerging epidemic.
I agree, because it would appear that the announcement that was made last week means that the powers that we have, as Welsh ministers have under the Wales Act, become moot. Because what the powers actually say is that they give us the ability to limit the number of machines with a stake of more than £10 in respect of new betting premises licences. Well, if the maximum stake is only 2, then those powers are academic. So I think that it is appropriate for us to look again at what would be appropriate for Wales in terms of further powers over gambling.
Susie Davis.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, recognising the symptoms of gambling isn't always that easy, and neither is providing the appropriate support as people respond differently to interventions. But for the more intractable problems, if you like, I wonder if you could tell me whether Welsh Government is able to identify how many people in Wales have been allocated a social worker to help them with their problem, or indeed have access to rehabilitation, a residential centre either in Wales or elsewhere. I appreciate you may not have the answer today, but I would like to, if you could write to me that answer, I'd be grateful, because I'd like to know who's actually picking up the tab for the support that we're offering.
No, I'm happy to write to the member with that information, and we'll do so.
Dai Lloyd.
Further to the questions and answers so far, a 2016 report published by the Institute of Public Policy Research suggests that problem gambling costs the Welsh Government between £40 million and £70 million every year. Now, since gambling and advertising have reserved powers, you can't be proactive on gambling, you can only react to the problems. So for clarity, and following what you said to Mick Anthony, why don't you demand that Westminster gives us the powers we need to minimise the financial cost, but more importantly, the human cost of problem gambling?
What would need to be addressed is online and TV advertising, because that's where a lot of gambling comes from now. For a long time, it hasn't been possible to advertise tobacco on TV. For a long time, it hasn't been possible to advertise alcohol on TV, and yet gambling advertising has increased. Now, if we're saying that for many people gambling is an addiction, as alcohol and tobacco can be for some people, why is it the case that gambling advertising has gone up? I mean, for example, there were 152,000 adverts in 2006, 1.3 million adverts shown in 2012, and those figures are already 6 years old. I mean, anybody who watches any kind of sporting event will notice the invitations for people to put a bet on there and then about who's going to score the next goal in the second half, who's going to score the next try, what the final score will be. It has the potential to cause huge addiction. So if we look at gambling, we then have to look at what happens in terms of internet regulation, what happens in terms of broadcasting. So it does impact on other areas. By far, to my mind, the easiest way of dealing with regulating gambling is to do it on a UK-wide basis. But certainly, one of the things that I would want to look at in the future is what would we look to do in Wales that takes us beyond the powers we were given in the 2017 Act that now appear not to be worth anything.
Cwestiwn 6, Darren Miller.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the future of the Wales for Africa programme?
Well, the Wales for Africa programme supports individuals, community groups and organisations in Wales to combat poverty in Africa in ways that deliver benefits both to Wales and Africa. We recently awarded a 3-year grant to Hub Cymru Africa and opened a small grant scheme to support activity across Wales.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. I'm a huge advocate of the programme and I think it's been doing some excellent work. Just last week I returned from Western Kenya where I saw the work that's being done by Just Earth, which is a Welsh-based charity helping subsistence farmers in that part of the country. It's also doing some work in Uganda too, and as a result they're increasing their crop yields and it's helping to eradicate poverty in that neck of the woods. Will you join me in congratulating Just Earth on their work? And what action is the Welsh Government going to take in order to identify other organisations like them who may not be engaged in the Wales for Africa programme so that we can maximise the opportunities that working together collaboratively can bring in sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, I'd support any organisation, of course, that is providing support to those most in need. And you asked the question, what are we doing as a government? Well, Hub Cymru Africa, as I've said, has been awarded a 3-year grant of £349,000 per annum for 2018 to 21. The Hub provides advice, training and support for the hundreds of groups in Wales that are active in Africa. That support is available to any organisation. And I can say that in terms of grant funding, we received 105 grant applications during 2017 to 18. So it shows that there's a great awareness of what we have to offer in terms of grant support. I'd encourage any organisation to engage with that process.
John Griffiths.
Yes, First Minister, I very much agree with Darren Miller, and I know many across the chamber on the value of the Wales for Africa programme. And I too have been lucky enough to see firsthand in Umbala, in Uganda, that the value of the educational and health links. In addition to what you've already mentioned in terms of Hub Cymru Africa and the grant scheme, will Welsh Government look at how further work could take place to build on the community-to-community links? Because I know there's a great deal of interest right across Wales in our communities in terms of how people can play their part in building on the progress already made.
Yes, I can. I mean, what I direct communities and community groups to look at is the Wales for Africa Small Grant Scheme. And that's designed, it was launched recently, it's designed to focus on enhancing Wales's contribution to combating poverty in Africa, but also designed, of course, to help community groups and community links to contribute to that agenda. And that grant scheme is open to established organisations, there are many across Wales, but also new organisations with new ideas. So it would be that scheme that I'd suggest that people look at in order to see how they can be helped to help others.
Mick Anthony.
First Minister, I'm sure you are well aware of the fantastic work that is being done by the Pontypridd-based charity Pont, who developed their links with Mbali in Uganda, and the considerable way in which that has developed to the benefit of the people in Uganda and Mbali. But my particular, I think, praise for is the actual educational work that charity is engaged within schools in Tafili, so that every school you go around there, you see now young students who are actually engaged in monitoring what's happening, in understanding, engaging with it, really developing a sort of traditional Welsh spirit of internationalism in terms of our responsibilities to the rest of the world and vice versa. And at a time when barriers are sort of going up around the UK and so on, isn't this a fantastic example for our school children of how we can contribute to all the global issues that affect us all?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to see Pont's work at first hand in Bali. I was there in 2014. For example, I knew about or saw the Pont motorcycle ambulance service. It provides emergency treatment for women in labour, getting them to the main hospital from quite inaccessible areas with poor roads. I saw that being demonstrated. There's a Pont coordinator who spends time in Bali working with partners to drive up standards. And I've seen, of course, what Pont has done in terms of providing infrastructure in Bali as well. It's a tremendous story over many, many years, and one that I was privileged to see.
Question 7, Mandy Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister outline the Welsh Government's policy on nuclear power?
Well, the development of nuclear policy lies with the UK Government, but we support new nuclear on existing sites to maximise the legacy benefits of any planned investment. So it means not just supporting a power station in the right place, but the growth of the supply chain and the development of skills and research whilst protecting our cultural heritage and environment.
Thank you for that answer. First Minister, I understand that the UK Government is currently talking to Hitachi about the funding package for Wylfa Newydd and that the outcomes are currently hanging in the balance. You will know that the people of North Wales are waiting patiently for the jobs in construction at the power station and in the supply chain that will be generated by this scheme. What words of comfort can you offer them?
Well, it's a matter for the UK Government rather than for us, but there are 2 points I think it's important to make. First of all, the UK Government seems insistent that we need to leave Euratom. I have absolutely no idea why we leave Euratom. I can't remember anybody saying that after in the doorstep in 2016 and putting in place what seemed to be identical regulations for no purpose at all. And I don't think that helps, I have to say, in terms of the level of uncertainty that might create. But secondly, I think it's hugely important there's an understanding in Whitehall that we do have to pay to contribute towards the building of power stations. We can't expect other people to build them for us all the time. There were issues around Hinckley. We still have nothing on the tidal lagoon, one of the most innovative schemes probably in the world at the moment, and let's see if the UK Government can be innovative and enterprising in the future. But it is hugely important that the financial issues are resolved so that there is a power station and, importantly, there are jobs on Anglesey.
David Melding.
First Minister, radioactive waste management is a devolved issue, and we currently have no high-level waste disposal site in Wales. Now, a consultation was launched in January to see if anywhere in Wales would volunteer to be the home of a nuclear waste disposal site. Have you had any responses, and you can report any progress to the Chamber?
Not that I'm aware of. This is, I remember doing this when I was Environment Minister. It is something that we investigate from time to time, but of course the reprocessing facilities in Sellafield are available to Wylfa. They're hugely important for the nuclear industry in the UK, but no community, as far as I'm aware, has volunteered.
Question 8, Dawn Bowden.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on recent actions the Welsh Government has taken to help tackle poverty in Valley's communities?
Well, if we look at Prosperity for All, the Valley's task force, for example, they are about improving people's lives, about delivering good quality jobs and skills to do them, and of course supporting better public services and strengthening Valley's communities.
Thank you for that, First Minister. Securing the well-being and prosperity of our Valley's towns and communities remains a significant challenge, as shown by a number of health, social and wider welfare indicators. And I was alarmed by the recent report from the Equality and Human Rights Commission that suggests that more people will be driven into poverty by UK welfare reforms, and that follows closely on the heels of reports by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Bevan Foundation, which states that the next wave of welfare reform will push even more people in our Valley's communities into poverty. Now, as my constituency of Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney prepares for the rollout of universal credit next month, will you join me once again in urging the benches opposite to raise their voices alongside ours to persuade their government in Westminster to stop this reckless policy of austerity now, before any more damage is wreaked upon the most vulnerable in our society?
Well, they will have heard that call. I mean, we've written to the UK Government asking them to reconsider their damaging changes the tax and welfare reform policies are having on households in Wales. But what I'm concerned about is that if we look at the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report published in March, that suggests that we will see that the reforms that they are proposing in Whitehall will push an extra 50,000 children into poverty by 2021 to 22. Now, the whole point, surely, of government is to look to find ways to even out inequality and look to reduce it as much as possible, not to increase it. But that is where the UK government are, and I'm deeply concerned about the fundamental flaws of universal credit. They've been well rehearsed in this chamber. But despite those flaws, the UK government is rolling the programme out. Yeah, we need to have a benefit system in this country that helps people rather than penalises them, which is what the current UK government seemingly want to do.
Mohammed Ashkar.
Presiding Officer, does the First Minister agree with me that the work is one of the best way out of poverty? And will he join me in welcoming the fact that unemployment in Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney has fallen by 52% since 2010?
Well, I have to say to the member that work is important, but well-paid work is crucial. We have always said to people, we used to say to people, if you get a job, you'll be better off. Yet why is it that there are people in work using food banks? Why is it that there are still stories of people who find themselves in a job but yet unable to afford the basic necessities of life? Why? Because of the benefit cuts, particularly in-work benefit cuts we've seen from the Conservative government. Because we have a Conservative government that doesn't value work. Because we have a Conservative government that doesn't believe in fair work. We believe in all those things. We want to see fair work for our people in all parts of Wales in the future.
Cwestiwn 9, Llyr Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. Sut y bydd y Prif Weinidog yn sicrhau bod gan weithwyr lais cryf mewn unrhyw drafodaethau sy'n ymwneud ag adrefnu gwasanaethau cyhoeddus?
Mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn gweithio gyda chyflogwyr sector cyhoeddus datgonoledig ac yn debyg llafur sy'n trwy gyngor partneriaeth y gweithlu mwyn sicrhau bod materion strategol fel newidiadau i wasanaethau cyhoeddus yn cael eu trafod. Yn lleol, mae cyflogwyr sector cyhoeddus wedi ymrwymo i drefniadau partneriaeth gymdeithasol tebyg.
Dwi wedi codi gofidiau ynglyn â preifateiddio gwasanaethau dialysis gyda chi yn flaenorol, a mae hynny wrth gwrs yn cynnwys y posibilrwydd o staff yn symud o'r gwasanaeth iechyd genedlaethol i'r sector breifat i weithio, rhywbeth maen nhw wedi bod yn gwbl glir dyn nhw ddim eisiau i ddigwydd. Nawr, mae yna gwestiynau mawr wedi cael eu codi gan y gweithwyr hyn ynglyn â'r broses sydd wedi cael ei ymgymryd â hi ym Mwrdd Iechyd Betsy Cadwaladr, i'r pwynt, fel bod nhw wedi sgwennu llythyr at y bwrdd a mi ddyfynnau yn sydyn o hwnnw, it's a disgraceful way for a responsible employer to conduct itself in such a process, medde'r gweithwyr. The staff feel that throughout this process, the communication has been poor and not undertaken in a timely manner, effectively preventing union representation and causing serious distress and worry to all staff concerned. The staff therefore request that you investigate and remedy deficiencies in the processes that have been highlighted to you. Now, Betsy Cadwaladr, of course, is under your government's direct control. So will you also undertake to investigate why the staff are so aggrieved at this process? Because in your previous answer, you talk the talk. Shouldn't you now walk the walk?
Well, can I say that no member of staff will be forced to move to the independent sector? It's hugely important to make that point. Secondly, my understanding is that patient representatives, trades unions and HR representatives have been invited to participate throughout the process of developing renal services in the north of Wales. No decision has been made as to the final service model. However, he has read directly from a letter, and I feel that I need to look at that letter to give the assurance to those people who have written that letter that this matter is being looked at, and I give him that assurance.
Ac yn ola, cwestiwn 10, Julie Morgan.
What action is the Welsh Government taking to enhance the natural environment of Wales?
We continue to implement the 7 key parts of the Environment Wales Act 2016. That puts in place a plan to manage Wales's natural resources and environment in a proactive, sustainable and joined-up way.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Last week, it was very pleasing to see that Wales had been awarded 47 blue flag beaches, which means we have more per mile of coastline than any other country in the UK. So that was very pleasing news. But what, First Minister, do you think the effect of leaving the EU will have on environmental standards, as it has meant until now that we have had to have high qualities for things like bathing water and for coastal management?
Well, it has to be said that it is our membership of the EU that drove up environmental standards in the UK. Our standards were appalling. The rivers are awful. You know, there was one river in Greater Manchester that was flammable in the 80s if you threw a match into it. My own river, the River Ogmore in Bridgend, would run different colours according to what had been thrown into it upriver. Now it's crystal. I was looking at it on Sunday. Crystal clear. We often used to see diseased fish in the river in the 80s. There was a major pollution incident there that killed all the wildlife around the river. We're a long way from there, and the last thing we should be is going back to those days. In terms of blue flag beaches, I very much welcome the fact that I have nearly 10% of them in my own constituency. I very much welcome the fact that we can say that our beaches meet a European standard, which is a high standard. The last thing we should do is have a lower standard for our beaches. To my mind, it makes perfect sense to stay as part of the blue flag scheme, or if that's not acceptable or palatable to the hardline Brexiteers, to have at least an equivalent scheme that's recognised as equivalent by everybody else in the world. But to go backwards, or to go back to the days that I remember in the 70s and 80s when basically our beaches were filthy and our rivers were polluted.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly yw'r datganiad a chyhoeddiant busnes, a dwi'n galw...